I stood in the middle of Mar Azul restaurant, the crystal chandeliers glittering above, staring straight into the face of Mrs. Lucia Rivera, the woman who had just called me a burden to her son, exactly 3 minutes ago. My hand trembled slightly as I opened the worn canvas bag, the same one she had just glanced at with thinly veiled contempt. From it, I pulled out a business card, elegant navy blue background, gold-embossed letters that gleamed under the light. Carmen Lewis, Executive Director. Ocean Vista, imports annual salary, $500,000. I placed the card on the table, right in front of her. "You know, Mrs. Lucia?" My voice was cold. "My company just opened a new branch in Brickell. We're hiring for a senior logistics manager. The salary is around $120,000 a year." I turned toward Mr. Hector, the man who had just boasted to me that he made $140,000 a year. "If you're interested, I can arrange an interview. Though, with your background, I'm not sure you'd pass the first round." His face turned visibly pale. Valentina, my daughter-in-law, gaped, hands trembling. Andre, my son, looked at me as if I were a stranger. And Mrs. Lucia? She sat frozen, napkin slipping from her hand, lips moving, but no sound coming out. But you're dressed like—" Her voice shook. "Like a poor woman?" I smiled faintly. "Yes, I dressed that way on purpose, because I wanted to see how you'd treat someone poor." Mrs. Lucia shot to her feet, the chair screeching sharply against the marble floor. Several heads turned, her face flushed crimson, fingers trembling as she pointed at me. You tricked us." I picked up the card, slipped it back into my bag, and met her eyes. "No, I just showed you who I really am, and now I've seen exactly who you are." I turned and walked away. Each step echoed against the stone floor, like a hammer striking through the thick silence of Mar Azul. But to understand why I did what I did, you'll have to hear the story from the beginning. If you want to follow the full story and the twists that come after, subscribe so you won't miss the next part. Tell me, what moment do you think made me decide to dress poor tonight? My name is Carmen Lewis. I'm 58 years old. I've been a widow for 12 years. I live alone in a 2-bedroom apartment in Coral Gables, not in a fancy neighborhood, just an old building with a balcony overlooking a street lined with jacaranda trees. Andre, my son, 35, has never known how much money his mother really makes. To him, I'm just Carmen Lewis, the woman who wakes up at 5 in the morning, brews coffee in an old aluminum pot, puts on a simple black suit, and takes the bus to work, an ordinary office employee, maybe a secretary, maybe an accountant. Nothing special. He never asked. And I never told. Why? Because I grew up in a family where money was the only thing people talked about. My father went bankrupt when I was 16. That night drunk, he said, "You know, Carmen, when you have money, everyone loves you. But when you lose it, they disappear faster than the dark." I didn't want my son to grow up believing that. 22 years working at Ocean Vista Imports. I started as an intern, climbed every small step. I've signed contracts worth millions, managed 73 employees, traveled across Europe and Asia, sat in meetings with CEOs of major corporations. But when I came home, I cooked with a pot I'd used for 15 years. I wore jeans from Marshall's for $19.99. I got my hair cut at the corner salon, $25 a visit. I have $1.3 million in my savings account, a small apartment paid off, a stable stock portfolio, and a 2015 Honda Civic that still runs perfectly. I only drive it when absolutely necessary. But Andre doesn't know. To him, his mother is the woman who always says, "Sweetheart, money's a bit tight this week. Can you cover your own phone bill?" Or, "I'm not traveling anywhere. I'd rather stay home and save." And he believes it, completely. If you've ever hidden a part of yourself just to keep others at peace, you'll understand that feeling. The truth isn't always spoken. Sometimes it's protected. Last Tuesday, my phone rang. It was Andre. "Mom, are you busy?" His voice sounded off, like someone hiding something. "No, go ahead." Valentina's parents came from Argentina. It's their first time in Miami. They want to meet you. I stopped typing. "That's great, honey. I'd love to meet them. They want to have dinner at Mar Azul. You know that place? Mar Azul, the most expensive seafood restaurant in Miami Beach, where the wealthy dine. A single meal could cost $300 per person." "I know it. This Saturday, 7 p.m. You'll come, right?" His voice trembled slightly, not from excitement, but fear, like he was worried I'd embarrass him. I asked slowly, "Tell me, what did you say to them about me?" Silence. I told them you work in an office. You live simply. You don't have much money." My heart clenched. "You told them I'm poor?" "No, Mom. I just said you're simple. Valentina's parents they care a lot about status. I just wanted them to see you as humble, genuine. That's a good thing, right, Mom? Humble, genuine. Two beautiful words, until they're used to hide shame. My son was ashamed of me. "I'll come, Andre." "Thank you, Mom." "And Mom?" "Yes? Could you dress nicely, but don't overdo it. Just be yourself. Don't overdo it, meaning don't try to look like you have money." "All right, son." I understand. I hung up, sat still in my 12th floor office, staring out the window toward Biscayne Bay. The sunset turned the water gold, and I realized something inside me had shattered. My son was ashamed of his mother. But if you've ever been looked down upon by someone you love, you'll understand. Sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's the moment you begin rewriting your own role. That night, I went home and stood before my wardrobe. On the left, Hugo Boss suits, Calvin Klein dresses, Kate Spade bags. On the right, old jeans, faded t-shirts, a pair of worn-out sneakers. I knelt down to the bottom drawer. There it was, a beige canvas bag, frayed at the edges, with coral red embroidery stitched by my own hands 20 years ago, when Andre was 15. When we had no money, nothing but the belief that the future would be different. I held the bag close, the smell of old fabric, the scent of memory. And in that moment, a thought struck me. If Andre thinks his mother is poor, if Valentina Rivera's parents are ready to judge me by appearance, if they believe a person's worth is measured by their wallet, then I'll show them exactly what they want to see. I'll play the role of the poor, naive, out-of-place mother, and I'll watch. Because after 22 years in business, I've learned one thing. People only reveal who they truly are when they think you have no power, when they think you're beneath them, when they believe you don't matter. I opened the closet, took out the plainest gray dress, put on the shoes with worn soles, removed my Cartier watch, a gift I'd bought myself after a promotion, and placed it in the drawer. I smiled at my reflection. I would go to Mar Azul as a poor mother, and this time I'd look straight into the true nature of Valentina Rivera's family. Because sometimes, to see people clearly, you must pretend not to see at all. And that Saturday night changed everything. What do you think? If it were you, would you dare to dress poor to test others' hearts? Hit subscribe and join me for dinner at Mar Azul, where every mask begins to fall. Saturday, 5 p.m. I stood before the mirror in my bedroom, the last light of day spilling through the balcony, scattering warm, golden streaks across the old wooden floor, darkened by time. The gray dress I chose was made of cheap cotton, shapeless, a little loose, with a simple round collar. I deliberately didn't iron it so the wrinkles would show naturally, as if it had just been pulled out of a forgotten laundry pile. Dark brown flats, the leather peeling at the toes, heels worn uneven. I almost threw them away last year, but today, they were the perfect prop. No jewelry, no lipstick, no watch. My hair was tied up hastily, with a few strands falling against my cheeks. No makeup. My skin looked dull, and the dark circles under my eyes were clear. I looked like a 58-year-old woman who had once been beautiful, once proud, but time had gradually stripped that away, perfect for tonight's role. I picked up the beige canvas bag with faded red coral embroidery. My fingers brushed over the old threads, uneven, rough. I remembered the night I stitched it, when Andre was 15, sitting beside me doing his math homework. "Mom, what are you embroidering?" "Red corals, sweetheart. Like under the sea, strong but beautiful." Now, that bag was a prop in the play I was about to perform. Inside it were a worn faux leather wallet, a few $20 bills, a local bank ATM card, a pack of tissues, and an old Nokia phone, which I dug out of a drawer and, luckily, still worked. No iPhone, no platinum credit cards, nothing that could betray who I really was. Except for one thing. I opened a small velvet box and took out an 18-karat gold necklace with a pendant of natural red coral, a gift from my late husband. I put it on, then gently tucked it beneath my collar, right next to my heart. A reminder, dignity doesn't need to be displayed, only upheld. If you've ever had to play a role just to protect your self-respect, you'll understand this feeling. In a world of masks, sometimes you have to wear one yourself to see who's truly hiding behind theirs. The Uber arrived at 6:30. I asked the driver to drop me off 2 blocks away from Mar Azul. I wanted to walk the rest of the way, to feel the pulse of Miami before sunset. The sky shifted from blue to orange, then faded to soft lilac. The air was humid, a mix of sea salt and expensive perfume. Waves from South Point whispered faintly in the distance. I walked slowly, watching women in Versace dresses, heels clicking against the pavement, men in Armani suits with glinting Rolex watches. No one looked at me. I was invisible in their world, and I realized this was exactly what Andre feared most, that his mother would make others uncomfortable, that my simplicity would give them a reason to look down on him. I took a deep breath and kept walking. Mar Azul. A glass facade gleamed under amber lights that spilled warmly onto the sidewalk. Inside, crisp white tablecloths, polished silverware, crystal glasses catching the light. Soft jazz music floated like the tide. A doorman in a black suit held the door open for a couple, the man in a navy suit, the woman in a bright red cocktail dress. He bowed slightly, smiling. I approached. His eyes flicked quickly from head to toe, pausing for a second. "Good evening," he said politely, though cautiously. "Do you have a reservation?" "I'm a guest of the Rivera family." "Table for 7 o'clock. He checked his iPad, then nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "Please come in. No smile. No, have a wonderful evening like the ones before me." The door opened. I stepped inside. Immediately I felt the eyes. No one stared directly, but I knew. The quick glances, the soft whispers, like the hum of mosquitoes. A woman leaned toward the man beside her, lips moving faintly. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew exactly what she said. The restaurant manager approached, a man with slicked back hair and tanned skin. "Good evening, ma'am. Your name?" "Carmen Lewis, guest of the Rivera party." "Yes, they're expecting you. Please, follow me." There are places where you don't need words to know you're being judged, where a look alone is enough to make you feel like you don't belong in their picture. We passed rows of gleaming tables. I deliberately hunched a little, took smaller, slower steps, clutched my canvas bag tightly, as if afraid someone might snatch it. And then I saw them. The corner table, by the window overlooking the ocean. The last light of dusk reflected on the water, casting a golden glow across the room. Andre stood up first. My son, 35, 6 feet tall, wearing a charcoal gray suit, navy tie, hair neatly styled, clean-shaven. Handsome, composed. but in his eyes, I saw something I'd never seen so clearly before: anxiety. He looked at me, quickly but carefully. In that look, I could see it. He was evaluating, hoping his mother wouldn't embarrass him, praying I would pass the test of the Rivera family. "Mom," his tone was tight. "You made it." No, "Mom, come in." No, "Mom, I missed you." Just confirmation, as if he'd completed an administrative task. "My son," I said softly, smiling kindly. "Sorry I'm a little late. The bus got stuck in traffic." The bus. I saw his lips twitch, a flicker of embarrassment crossing his eyes. Next to him was Valentina, my daughter-in-law, 32, from Argentina. Fair skin, straight chestnut hair gleaming like silk, flowing over her shoulders. Big brown eyes, thick lashes coated in mascara, lips painted crimson. She wore a cream-colored fitted dress with a bateau neckline, long sleeves, pearl necklace, diamond earrings, nude high heels. Valentina stood, stepped forward, and kissed both my cheeks, European style. "Mother Carmen," she said sweetly, but coldly, "so happy to finally meet you." Her eyes flicked down to my gray dress. A short glance, but enough. In that look was disappointment. "Likewise, my dear," I replied gently. Then I turned to the remaining two, and my heart pounded. Right before me, seated in the place of honor, were Lucia and Hector Rivera. Mrs. Lucia wore a wine-red silk dress with a pearl collar, her hair neatly pinned, lips painted the same deep red, a wide coral necklace gleaming at her throat. Mr. Hector wore a white suit, top button undone, a thin gold chain around his neck. Both of them shared the same expression, a polite smile and an assessing gaze, the look of people who believed they were above, and I was merely an unremarkable mother who had wandered into their world by mistake. I sat down, took a deep breath, and thought silently, "All right, let's see how your game ends." Because sometimes, to understand people, you must step right into the trap they set and pretend to be the prey. If you were in my place, would you dare stay silent and play the weaker one, just to see who's real? Lucia Rivera. She sat upright like a model on a runway, looked around 55, but the flawless makeup, and likely a few visits to a cosmetic clinic, made her appear 45. Jet black hair styled in a classic French twist, green eyes, probably contact lenses, sharp as blades. She wore an off-shoulder cobalt silk dress that hugged every curve, a diamond necklace, emerald earrings, a Cartier bracelet on her right wrist, a white gold charm bracelet on her left with a dozen charms, each likely an expensive memory. Her manicured hand rested on the table, nails painted wine red. On her ring finger gleamed a diamond so large I wondered if she could even lift her hand comfortably. Lucia looked at me. Not a greeting, not curiosity, an appraisal. The kind one gives to an item, not a person. Her gaze traveled from my loose bun down to my wrinkled gray dress, paused on my worn flats, then flicked over my embroidered canvas bag. Clear as day, she was assessing my worth. Beside Lucia sat Hector Rivera, tall, broad-shouldered, silver hair slicked back to reveal a wide forehead, sharp features, square jaw, the tan of a man who played golf at a private course, not one who worked outdoors. He wore a dark gray suit with an open white shirt, the casual elegance of the wealthy, rose gold cufflinks. On his wrist, a Patek Philippe Nautilus. I recognized it instantly, at least $80,000. He rose and extended his hand. I shook it, cold, light, quick, like he couldn't wait to let go. "Mrs. Lewis," he said in a low voice, smooth but void of warmth. "I'm Hector. This is my wife, Lucia." Lucia reached out her hand, without standing. I touched her fingertips lightly. Within 3 seconds, she withdrew, subtly wiping her hand on her napkin. Wiping. as if I were dirty. I swallowed my irritation and forced a shy smile. "Pleasure to meet you both," I said softly, deliberately making my voice tremble. "Andres told me so much about your family." Lucia smiled, but her eyes didn't. "Is that so?" "We've heard about you too, though not much." Still polite, but the message clear. Your son had nothing worth saying about you. I pulled out the chair at the far end of the table, the one furthest from Lucia and Hector. No one helped. Andre sat down before I even settled. Valentina was busy fixing her hair. The waiter, a young man around 25 in a white shirt and black apron, brought menus, thick leather-bound menus with no prices listed, just elegant names blending English and Spanish: wild-caught Chilean sea bass, truffle-infused risotto, Hokkaido scallops. I opened mine, frowned slightly as if confused. Lucia was watching. I could feel it. "Do you need help with the menu?" she asked, voice honey-sweet but fake. I looked up, pretending relieved. "Oh, yes. I'm not really familiar with these dishes." Lucia skimmed her menu, eyes glinting. Maybe we should order something. Simple, nothing too fancy." She turned to the waiter. "Do you have anything more basic? Maybe fried fish?" The waiter hesitated. Ma'am, we have pan-seared branzino or grilled red snapper." Lucia nodded. "For Mrs. Lewis, a red snapper. No appetizer. Water. Tap water's fine." Then she turned to me. "Is that okay? We just don't want to waste." The word waste hung in the air like smoke. I nodded meekly. "Yes, thank you so much. I don't want to be a bother." Andre looked down at his plate. Valentina sipped her wine. Silence. Hector ordered a bottle of Malbec Reserve 2015 from Argentina, $280. Lucia ordered Maine lobster for her appetizer. Valentina ordered bluefin tuna carpaccio. Andre ordered Wagyu steak. No one asked if I wanted wine. The waiter poured for the four of them, skipping my glass entirely. I rested my hand over my canvas bag and watched them raise their glasses. "To our visit to Miami," Andre said. "To family," Valentina added. They drank. I drank water. And then Lucia began. "So, Mrs. Lewis," she said lightly, voice smooth but razor-sharp, "Valentina tells us you work in an office." "That sounds interesting. What kind of office?" I set my glass down. "Yes, dear. I work at an import company, handling paperwork, shipments, things like that." "Oh." Lucia nodded slowly. "Paperwork. I see. So, not management?" "No, ma'am. Just administrative work." Lucia smiled. "Of course. That's important too. Someone has to do it, right?" Hector chimed in. "How long have you been there?" 22 years, sir." 22 years! Hector raised his glass, feigning admiration, but I heard the sneer beneath it. "And still in administration." "That's remarkable patience," Valentina bit her lip. Andre stared out the window. I smiled faintly. "I never climbed very high. Just worked hard." Lucia placed her manicured hand atop Hector's. "That's admirable, too." "Not everyone's born to lead. Some are born to follow. Sounded a lot like serve. My fingers tightened around the bag strap, but my face stayed composed, wearing that gentle, humble smile. "Yes, perhaps you're right." Lucia's eyes dropped to my bag. "That's an interesting purse." "Handmade?" "Yes, I embroidered it myself." "Really? How lovely," she cooed, her voice dripping with syrup and poison. "Hardly anyone hand embroiders these days. Most people buy designer bags now. But of course, designer bags are quite expensive. Not everyone can afford them." She looked at me, and in her eyes were the words she didn't say aloud. "You're poor. You don't belong here. You're not worthy of my family." I bowed my head slightly. Yes, designer bags are expensive. And inside, a small flame began to burn. There are knives that don't draw blood. They glide through with smiles, with a single word like waste, with the deliberate omission of a glass of wine. Keep going, Lucia. Keep showing your true colors, because with every word, you're digging the hole you'll eventually fall into. The appetizers arrived. Maine lobster for Lucia, 2 large tails, shells gleaming red, drenched in garlic butter, dotted with lemon slices and sprigs of bright parsley. Tuna carpaccio for Valentina, paper-thin slices drizzled with truffled olive oil and sprinkled with toasted macadamia crumbs. In front of me, nothing. I sat still, hands lightly folded over my stomach, watching them begin to eat. Lucia took a claw and cracked it with movements so graceful they felt almost theatrical. She dipped it in butter, brought it to her lips, closed her eyes, and exhaled softly like someone who had just touched culinary heaven. "Exquisite," she murmured, dreamy. "Hector, you must try this. The lobster tastes as if it was just caught." Hector smiled and lifted his glass. "I told you. Mar Azul never disappoints. This is why we should come to places like this. Quality is something you cannot compromise." Then he glanced at me, quick enough to seem accidental, but I caught the meaning. Quality. He was talking about food, but the implication was far broader. Sometimes humiliation doesn't arrive through crude words, but through casual remarks wrapped in counterfeit politeness. It's velvet smooth, and it cuts deeper than a blade. Valentina set down her fork and tilted her head. "Mother Carmen, have you ever dined at places like this?" Her tone was light, the question seemingly innocent, but I knew it wasn't. I smiled gently. "No, dear. I usually eat at home, or at a few spots near my place." Lucia let out a soft laugh. "Neighborhood spots? Practical, thrifty, a smart way to live, when the budget is limited." "A limited budget? It sounded like I lived on assistance." Hector added, "But sometimes one should treat oneself. Experience finer things. Of course, that requires financial capacity." He raised his wine, swirling it, studying the ruby sheen beneath the lights. "This bottle, for instance, a 2015 Malbec Reserve, $280. It sounds expensive, but when you taste it—" He took a sip, closed his eyes, and smiled with self-satisfaction. "You understand why it's worth it." He opened his eyes and turned to me. "Mrs. Lewis, do you drink wine?" I shook my head slightly. I'm not used to it." "Oh, that's a shame. Wine is one of life's refined pleasures, but to appreciate it, one needs a trained palate, which, naturally, requires time, money, and experience." He spoke like a man delivering a sermon. I only smiled and nodded. "Yes, I understand." And silently I thought, at home I have a small wine nook with 15 bottles from France, Italy, Chile, and one Chateau Margaux 2010 worth $600. But you don't need to know that, Hector. At last, Andre spoke, perhaps to break the suffocating air. "Dad, Hector, how's work in Buenos Aires these days?" "Still busy?" Hector's eyes brightened. This was his terrain. "Insanely busy," he said, animated. "Last month I closed a major deal, a logistics contract with a U.S. pharma company, $2.3 million over 2 years. Had to fly to Houston 5 times, but worth it. At this level, you must be ready to sacrifice." He leaned back, one arm hooked over the chair, the posture of a man certain of victory. "My after-tax income last year was about $140,000. Enough for us to live comfortably. Private school for Valentina, European vacations, and only the best of everything." Then he looked at me. "Mrs. Lewis, your administrative job, if you don't mind, what's your annual income?" The room fell silent. Andre lowered his head. Valentina pressed her lips together. Lucia reclined, smiling faintly, as if waiting to see how I would stumble. I swallowed. My voice trembled just enough to be believable. About $35,000 a year. The truth. My base salary is $200,000. With bonus and equity, last year I took home $287,000. But tonight, I was poor Carmen. $35,000 a year. Sometimes, to expose others' true faces, you must first set aside your own. You let them believe you're the weaker one, just to see what they do when they think they can step on you. Hector nodded thoughtfully. $35,000? In Miami, the cost of living is high. I imagine you have to be very careful. Yes, very careful, I replied softly. Lucia placed her napkin on the table and smiled. I can't imagine it. Living on $35,000? What a challenge. Valentina spoke up, voice small. Mother Carmen is very simple. She doesn't need much. Lucia turned to her daughter, gentle yet mocking. Yes, darling. But not needing much and not having much are different things. One is a choice. The other is circumstance. She sipped her wine and cast the final line like a sentence. What matters is knowing one's place. Not living in delusion, knowing one's place, meaning, know you're beneath us. The mains arrived. In front of me sat a small piece of grilled salmon, a few spears of asparagus, and a lemon wedge, likely the cheapest entree on the menu, around $28. Andre received a large Wagyu steak, perfectly pink, sprinkled with Himalayan sea salt, $85. Lucia had lobster thermidor, Gruyere and cognac sauce, $120. Hector chose Mediterranean sea bass, richly aromatic, $95. Valentina had truffle mushroom risotto, $68. The scent of butter, garlic, truffle, and herbs spread across the table. My stomach tightened, not from hunger, but from reflex. Still, I remained composed. I cut a small bite of fish and chewed slowly. How is your fish, Mrs. Lewis? Lucia asked, sweetness bordering on cloying. I'm afraid it might be a bit simple, but we thought it would suit your palate. I looked up with a faint smile. Very good. Thank you, Lucia smiled. Victory. Hector sliced his fish and dipped it in lemon butter sauce. When people grow accustomed to simplicity, he said, they stop desiring complexity. It's a kind of adaptation. He chewed, swallowed, then looked at me. Some are born to savor the refined, and some are not. There are words that feel feather light when thrown, yet they ripple across the still surface like stones, spreading circles of humiliation. I set down my knife and fork, my hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the effort of holding my anger in check. I wanted to rise, to shout, "Who are you humiliating? Do you have any idea who I am?" But not yet, not yet. I needed them to cross the line, so that when I turned, no one could deny they deserved it. I breathed deeply and offered a gentle smile. Yes, perhaps you're right. And so they kept eating, kept talking, kept digging, with their own hands, the very hole they were sitting in. I ate small bites of fish, chewed slowly, kept my head down, but I heard everything. Lucia was describing their recent vacation in Punta del Este, a lavish resort town on Uruguay's coast. We rented a private villa, she said proudly. 3 bedrooms, an infinity pool overlooking the ocean. A private chef made us breakfast every morning. I'd wake early, go out on the balcony, drink champagne, and watch the sunrise. Heaven on earth, Valentina nodded. I remember the pictures you sent. Beautiful. We spent about $12,000 that week, Hector added casually, as if stating the price of bottled water, but worth every penny. Some experiences money can't buy. Actually, correction, money absolutely can buy them, and it's worth it. He laughed. Lucia laughed. Valentina smiled, weakly. Andre stared at his steak, didn't laugh, and I sat still. The poor woman with no vacations, no villas, no champagne mornings. Lucia turned to me. "Mrs. Lewis, do you travel much?" I set my fork down. "Not very often, ma'am." "Oh? When was the last time you did?" I pretended to think. Maybe 5 years ago. I drove down to Key West, stayed at a motel. Just one night, Lucia's eyes widened. A perfect performance. "Key West is lovely." "Though, a motel?" She chuckled softly. "I've never stayed in one. I imagine it must be different from a hotel. Very different," I said quietly. "But cheap." $60 a night, Hector nodded approvingly. Frugal. Practical. That's how people with limited means should live. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. But his tone was the same one adults use to console a child who's just broken a toy. I glanced at Andre. My son sat motionless, face tense, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on his plate. He said nothing, didn't defend me, didn't stop Lucia and Hector. Just sat there, silent, like a statue. And in that instant, something cracked inside my chest. Not because of Lucia, not because of Hector, because of Andre. The boy I had carried, raised, and loved above all else, was sitting there letting others humiliate his mother. He didn't have the courage to protect me, because he was afraid. Afraid of what his in-laws would think, afraid they'd look down on him if he sided with his poor mother. That realization hurt more than every insult Lucia and Hector had combined. I swallowed hard, forcing back the tears. Under the table, my hand clutched the strap of my canvas bag, trembling. Valentina spoke up, voice soft, maybe trying to soothe. "Mother Carmen, do you have any hobbies?" "What makes you happy?" I looked into her eyes, saw a flicker of empathy, a flicker of shame, but not enough to stand against her parents. I like sewing," I said quietly. "Embroidery. Reading." Lucia laughed. "Sewing? Really? What a lost art. Nobody sews anymore. People throw things away and buy new ones. But of course, if one can't afford new clothes, sewing is a practical solution." She sipped her wine and added lightly, "I have a maid in Buenos Aires who loves sewing too. She fixes my clothes. Very talented. I pay her $15 each time a maid. Lucia had just compared me to her maid. And I, Carmen Lewis, executive director of Ocean Vista Imports, who manages a $50 million annual budget, had just been likened to a woman she pays $15. Hector placed his napkin on the table and glanced at his watch. "It's 9. Let's order dessert. I heard the creme brulee here is excellent." He gestured to the waiter. The young man approached. "Yes, sir?" "Dessert menu," Hector said. The waiter handed it over. Hector skimmed. "I'll have the creme brulee." "Chocolate soufflé," Lucia said. "Tiramisu," Valentina. "Panna cotta," Andre. 4 orders. No one asked me. Hector was about to close the menu when he paused, glanced at me. "Oh, sorry. Mrs. Lewis, would you like dessert?" Everyone turned to look. Lucia smiled, polite but cold. Valentina looked down. Andre remained silent. And I, sitting at the end of the table, in my wrinkled gray dress, clutching my embroidered bag, suddenly felt like an intruder at my own family's dinner. "No, thank you," I said softly. "I'm full." Hector nodded. "Sure? The desserts here are great, positive." "All right. 4, then." He handed the menu back to the waiter. The waiter nodded and walked away, and I sat there, no dessert, like a child being quietly punished. Lucia turned to her daughter. "Valentina, let's go shopping next week, Bal Harbor's having a sale. I'll get you some new outfits." "Thank you, Mom." "And you too, Andre," Lucia added. "You need a new suit." "The one you're wearing looks a little worn." Andre nodded. "Thank you, Mom." Mom. Andre called Lucia Mom. And I, the mother who bore him, raised him, sacrificed everything for him, sat there like a stranger. I bit my lip and looked out the window. Outside, city lights shimmered. The ocean waves rolled gently against the shore. Everything looked calm, but inside me, a storm was forming. There are nights when what hurts isn't a stranger's knife, but the silence of someone you love. Silence has sound. It echoes for a very long time. And I knew. I knew the moment was coming, the moment when I would no longer stay silent, because everyone has a limit. And they had just crossed mine. The desserts arrived. In front of Hector, golden creme brulee, its caramel crust cracking neatly under the tap of his spoon. Lucia had a tall, perfect chocolate soufflé dusted with fine cocoa. Valentina's tiramisu gleamed in soft layers of cream, topped with a whisper of chocolate powder. Andre's panna cotta shimmered white under bright strawberry sauce. 4 desserts, 4 people. In front of me, an empty plate. They ate, spoon by spoon. The sound of silver against porcelain filled the air. Delicious. Melts in your mouth. Worth every penny. And I sat still, hands clasped in my lap, watching them enjoy their world. Quiet. Invisible. Lucia turned to me mid-bite. Mrs. Lewis, I'm curious. Andre said you live alone. Do you have any savings for the future? A retirement fund, perhaps? A direct question. Rude, but coated in the sweet syrup of concern. I answered slowly, I have saved a little. How much is a little? Hector cut in, tone that of a teacher correcting a child. Forgive me for being frank, but with a $35,000 income at 58, I doubt you've built much. I lowered my eyes. Around 15,000? The truth? I have 1.3 million in savings, 400,000 in stocks, 200,000 in retirement funds, and a fully paid apartment worth 350,000. But tonight, I am the woman with 15,000 to her name. Hector nodded, voice tinged with mock sympathy. 15,000. At your age, that's concerning. Lucia crossed her arms, setting down her spoon. Mrs. Lewis, I don't mean to sound rude, but you do realize that money won't last a year after you retire, right? If you stop working at 65, it'll be gone before you know it. I replied softly, I haven't thought about it. You should, Lucia said firmly. Reality doesn't wait, and honestly, at your age, it's too late to change much. Hector added proudly, I started investing at 30. I'm 57 now. My portfolio's around 900,000. When we retire, Lucia and I will live comfortably, travel, enjoy life. That's strategic thinking. But of course, not everyone has that ability. He looked at me, eyes full of superiority, the gaze of a man mistaking arrogance for wisdom. And I sat there listening to him brag about his 900,000, wanting to laugh, because I had twice that, and more. But he didn't need to know. Sometimes people speak of success not to inspire, but to crush, and they only reveal their true nakedness when they believe you're too small to see it. Valentina suddenly looked up. Mom, that's enough. Please stop. Lucia arched an eyebrow, shocked. What did you just say? I'm merely giving Mrs. Lewis some practical advice. That's not advice, Valentina said, her voice trembling. It's humiliation. Silence froze the table. Lucia set her spoon down, face hardening. Humiliation? You're accusing your own mother of humiliating someone? I'm not. I just think maybe we should. Should what? Pretend? Lie? Lucia snapped, voice rising. The truth may hurt, but it's still the truth. Mrs. Lewis has no savings, no plan, no financial stability. And if no one tells her that, she'll never face it. Hector nodded solemnly. Lucia's right. We're not insulting. We're helping Valentina turn desperately to Andre. Say something. Please. Andre looked at her, then at his in-laws, then at me. For a split second, our eyes met. In his, I saw shame, guilt, but not enough courage. I think, he exhaled shakily, we should change the subject. Change the subject. Not, don't speak to my mother that way. Not, you've gone too far. Just change the subject. And in that moment, I knew. Enough. Sometimes the final straw doesn't come from those who insult you, but from the one who should have defended you and chose silence instead. I stood up, not in anger, not in haste. Slowly, as if gravity had lightened, every head turned toward me. Mrs. Lewis? Lucia raised an eyebrow. Where are you going? I didn't answer. My hand reached into the canvas bag, pulled out a card. Thick navy cardstock, gold embossed letters, silver trim. The one I'd kept there all night, waiting for this exact moment. I placed it on the table, right between the half-eaten desserts and the glasses of red wine. Lucia glanced down, frowning, picked it up. Read. Her eyes widened. Hector leaned in, face draining from pink to pale. Valentina gasped. Mother Carmen, this is... Andre stared at the card, then at me. His face turned white. Mom. I straightened my back. My shoulders relaxed. My chin lifted. No longer the poor woman shrinking at the edge of the table. I was Carmen Lewis, Executive Director of Ocean Vista Imports. You know, Mrs. Lucia? My voice was calm, steady, and cold. My company just opened a new branch in Brickell. We're hiring for a senior logistics manager, salary around $120,000 a year. I turned to Hector. You said you make $140, right? Impressive. Though, with your background, I'm not sure you'd pass our first interview round. Hector froze, speechless. I turned back to Lucia. My base salary is $400,000 a year. With bonuses and equity, last year I earned $487,000. I have nearly $4 million in savings, a fully paid apartment, and an investment portfolio that your husband with his $900,000 would envy. I paused, long enough for each word to sink in. But tonight, I chose to dress like someone poor. I chose to act like a simple, uneducated mother with no money, because I wanted to see how you would treat someone you thought had no worth. Silence. Absolute. Only the faint jazz music and the sound of waves outside remained. I looked at each of them. Lucia, Hector, Andre, Valentina. Then I spoke, softly. But my words cut like glass. Now I see clearly. I see exactly who you really are. Lucia shot to her feet. The chair scraped against the marble floor, shrieking sharp enough to pierce the air. Heads turned. Conversations at nearby tables halted mid-sentence. A waiter froze, the glasses on his tray trembling. Lucia's face flushed crimson, not from shame, but rage. You lied to us, she hissed, voice trembling. You deceived us. I didn't answer. I simply met her eyes, calm, cold, unwavering. Lied? I repeated, my tone laced with quiet irony. I didn't lie about anything. I just didn't add unnecessary details. I dressed simply. That's my choice. I carried a hand-embroidered bag because it means something to me. I didn't flaunt money because I don't need to prove anything to anyone. I stepped forward. Lucia instinctively stepped back. And you? I swept my gaze across Lucia and Hector. You spent the entire evening pricing me, by the dress I wore, the bag I carried, the food I ordered. You mocked me because you thought I was poor, compared me to your maid, asked about my savings as if I owed you an explanation. My voice wasn't raised, but it carried, enough for 3 nearby tables to hear every word. So tell me, who should be ashamed here? Hector rose, trying to regain composure. Mrs. Lewis, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We never what? I cut in. Never looked down on me? Never mocked me? Never sat here tallying your assets just to make me feel small? I turned to Andre. My son sat frozen, face drained, fists clenched on the table, head bowed. And you? My voice softened, but the pain cut deeper. You sat there in silence while they did this to me. Andre lifted his head, eyes glistening. Mom, you're ashamed of me, Andre. I said the words no one dared to say. So ashamed that you told them I was poor, that I lived simply, that I didn't have much. You were afraid to tell them the truth, afraid of what they'd think of you. I didn't. You did. I took a shaky breath. And that hurt more than anything Lucia or Hector could ever say. Valentina burst into tears, covering her face, shoulders trembling. Lucia regained her icy tone, chin raised high. Fine. You're rich. That doesn't change the fact that you deceived us. You acted. You made us look like fools. This was a trap. A setup. A setup? I met her glare head on. No, it's justice. You judged me by appearances. I simply let you face the consequences, Hector growled, voice low and tight. You may have money, Mrs. Lewis, but you have no class. A classy woman wouldn't play games like this. I laughed once. Short, bitter. Class? You. A man who spent the night bragging about your income, your $12,000 vacation, your $900,000 portfolio. Think that's class? I shook my head slowly. Class is knowing when to be silent, treating people with respect, no matter what they wear. It's not measuring a person's worth by their bank balance. You have money, Hector. But class? Not an ounce. Hector's face went pale. His jaw locked tight, but no words came out. I turned to Valentina. My daughter-in-law sat trembling, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Valentina, my voice softened. You're not like your parents. I saw that. You tried to stop them. You just weren't strong enough yet. You're still afraid of them. Valentina nodded through sobs. Mother Carmen, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. You don't need to apologize to me, I said gently. Apologize to yourself for letting them control your life, for letting them teach you that money matters more than decency. Then I looked at Andre. My son. My voice broke. I raised you alone after your father died. I worked every day so you'd never go without. I never bragged. I never taught you to worship wealth. I taught you kindness, respect, honesty. Tears streamed down my face. I didn't wipe them away. But tonight, I realized you never learned that lesson. You were ashamed of me, not because I did anything wrong, but because I wasn't rich enough in the eyes of the people you wanted to impress. Andre stood abruptly. Mom, don't. I raised a hand. Nothing you say changes what happened. You stayed silent when I needed you most, and that's enough. I lifted my canvas bag, holding it up for all to see. This bag, the one you mocked, the one you called cute in that condescending tone. Do you even know what it means? I brushed my fingers along the worn coral red stitching. I embroidered this 20 years ago, when Andre was 15, when we really didn't have much, when I was just starting my climb in business. I made it on sleepless nights after long shifts, when I was too tired to rest, but still needed to do something with my hands. My voice trembled. This bag reminds me where I came from. That money comes and goes, but dignity, that's something no one can buy. I looked straight at Lucia. You have your Hermes, your diamonds, your Cartier. But you know what? None of that makes you a better person. It just makes you shinier. Lucia's mouth opened, but no words came out. I turned away. I'm done. I walked past the tables, feeling every pair of eyes following me. Some whispered, some nodded quietly. The restaurant manager hurried toward me. Ma'am, the bill? Send it to Mr. Hector Rivera, I said without looking back. He's got $900,000 in his portfolio. I'm sure he can afford it. I pushed the door open and stepped into the Miami night. Warm air brushed against my skin. The faint scent of salt drifted from the sea. The waves hummed softly in the distance. For the first time all evening, I could breathe, a long, steady, liberated breath. Behind me came the sound of chairs scraping, sharp voices, and Valentina's sobs rising louder. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I had said everything that needed saying. The rest, they would have to live with. Sometimes, you don't win by staying to argue. You win by walking away, with your dignity intact. And sometimes, silence is the loudest declaration of all. I walked along Ocean Drive. No Uber, no taxi, just walking. I needed air, space, distance between me and the storm that had just exploded. My old flats slapped softly against the pavement. To my left, the Art Deco hotels glowed in neon pink, blue, and gold. To my right, the night ocean stretched wide, the salty wind brushing my face, waves rhythmic, the moon painting a silver ribbon across the water. I walked slowly, breathed deeply. Each step peeled away a layer of anger still clinging to me. But in my mind, their faces stayed vivid. Lucia, red with shock and fury. Hector, frozen, pride shattered. Valentina, crying uncontrollably. And Andre. "Mom!" The voice came from behind. I didn't turn. The sound of hurried footsteps drew closer. "Mom, please, wait!" Andre ran up, panting, shirt wrinkled, his face flushed, from running and from crying. He stopped a few steps away, breath unsteady. "Mom, I'm sorry." "I'm so sorry." I turned around, looked at my 35-year-old son, tall, successful, once confident everywhere, now standing like a lost child who can't find his mother in a supermarket. "Sorry for what, Andre?" My voice was quiet but cold. For lying about me? For being ashamed of me? Or for sitting there while they humiliated me? Andre swallowed hard, his voice cracking. "All of it. I'm sorry for all of it." I stepped closer, met his eyes. "Do you have any idea what it felt like? Sitting at that table, listening to them belittle me, while my own son stared at his plate?" Tears streamed down Andre's face. I didn't know what to do. Didn't know? My tone rose, not from anger, but pain. "You didn't know how to say, 'Don't talk about my mother that way'? You didn't know how to stand up for the person who gave you life?" Andre wiped his face, voice trembling. "I was scared, Mom. Scared if I said something, they'd think I had a poor mother." I cut him off. "Not good enough? Not worthy of their daughter?" Andre nodded, crying. "Yes, I was afraid. Afraid they'd look down on me, look down on us." I shook my head slowly. "What you don't understand, Andre, is that I'm not poor. I just don't flaunt what I have. I've never needed to." Andre sobbed, voice breaking. "I know that now. I know it, and I feel awful. I betrayed you, Mom. I let fear be louder than love." I stayed silent, studying his face. In the dim streetlight, I saw genuine remorse in his eyes. Part of me wanted to hold him, say, "It's all right." But another part, the one cracked all the way down, couldn't. Not yet. Sometimes the deepest betrayal doesn't come from enemies, but from the ones you once called home. Not because they hurt you, but because they stayed silent when you needed them most. "Andre," I said softly, "do you know why I never told you how much money I really have?" He shook his head. "Because I never wanted money to define us. I didn't want you to think your worth came from your bank account or your status. I wanted you to know you're loved simply for who you are." I sighed. "But tonight, you proved the opposite. You let others define me. And worse, define you. Andre cried harder. I know, Mom. I was stupid. I let pressure, pride, and the need to fit in blind me. I forgot what you taught me. I nodded. Yes, you forgot. The ocean wind grew stronger. My gray dress fluttered in the moonlight. Andre stepped closer. Can you forgive me, Mom? I looked straight into his eyes. I don't know, Andre. I need time. Because what you did tonight didn't just hurt me. It made me question if I failed at raising you. Andre shook his head desperately. No, Mom, you didn't fail. I did. I let you down. But please give me a chance to make it right. I gazed toward the sea. The waves rolled. The moon shimmered. You want to make it right? I asked. Then start by facing yourself. Ask who you are, who you want to be. Do you want to be someone who judges others by clothes and cars, or someone who respects people for what's in their heart? Andre nodded through tears. The second one. I swear I'll change. Promises are easy, Andre, I said softly. Actions are hard. You'll have to prove it. Not with words, but with how you live. How you treat me, Valentina. Everyone. I paused. And you'll have to face Lucia and Hector. You'll have to tell them what they did was wrong. Set boundaries. If you don't, you'll spend your life living under their shadow. Andre nodded firmly, tears still streaming. I will. I promise. I looked at him, long and deep, and in his eyes, I saw something different this time. Resolve. Maybe tonight wasn't entirely a disaster. Maybe it was the wake-up call he needed. I spoke quietly. Go home, Andre. Valentina needs you. Talk, really talk, about what kind of family you want to build. Andre nodded. What about you, Mom? Will you come home? I'll walk a bit more. I need air. Can I walk with you? I shook my head gently. Not tonight, son. I need to be alone. Andre hesitated, then stepped forward and hugged me. A trembling, desperate embrace. Mom, I'm so sorry. I love you. I said nothing. I let him hold me. Then he pulled away, turned, and walked off, his figure shrinking beneath the neon glow, smaller and smaller, until it disappeared into the night. I stayed there, alone on the sidewalk, facing the ocean, listening to the waves, feeling the wind through my hair, and for the first time in hours, I felt peace. Some wounds don't need to be healed. They exist to remind us how we rose again. My name is Carmen Lewis, and tonight I learned this. Respect isn't something you demand. It's something you build through silence, through boundaries, and through walking away at the right time. If this story reminded you that self-respect is the greatest gift you can keep for yourself, leave a comment. Which moment in your life made you realize you needed to set your own boundaries? I read every comment like a letter from the heart. And if you want to keep following stories of courage, awakening, and healing, don't forget, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next episode. Turn on notifications, because who knows, the next story might just be yours.